Hi, I'm Christy Rost. Today's show was inspired by a memorable cruise on the Rhine River from Amsterdam to Basel, Switzerland. European cities and towns are bursting with beautiful pastry shops, each reflecting regional baking traditions. So I thought it'd be fun to take you on a culinary trip down the Rhine, highlighting these irresistible regional specialties. Welcome to At Home with Christy Rost. I'm going to begin with Dutch speculaas, and you may know them better as windmill cookies. So I have a half cup of butter, unsalted butter, very soft, and I'm using the paddle attachment because this is going to make a pretty stiff dough. And then I will just whip this up a little bit and add in brown sugar. Always pack your brown sugar, and that is 3/4 cup. And I want to mix it until it's really nice and light. Turn down the speed a bit and add in 1 tablespoon of molasses. So we're starting in Amsterdam with this recipe. And I have all these cute little molds that I found in Amsterdam, the little wooden ones here, and they're used to make speculaas. And so I thought it'd be fun to create the recipe for the windmill cookies that are so popular in that area and use these cute little molds. As soon as I saw them in the shop in Amsterdam, I was all over it. It's like, oh my gosh, I've got to get those. So we've got our molasses in there. Now I'm going to, while that stirs up a little bit, I'm going to get all my dry ingredients together. So I have 2 cups of flour, and I'm going to add in some baking powder, about a half teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of Saigon cinnamon. Saigon cinnamon is very pungent, so you get a lot of great flavor from it, as opposed to just plain cinnamon. You'll find it in just about every spice section of a grocery store. A little bit of ginger. Here's one of the secrets to the windmill cookies. That flavor that you maybe can't identify, it's cardamom. And it has a little bit of a peppery flavor to it. And then I've got a little bit of cloves here. So very typical of cookies and baked goods throughout the Rhine River area. Spices, lots of warm spices, lots of cinnamon and spice. So you just stir these together really, really well till they're well blended. Then I begin to add this to my creamed mixture, little at a time. And I'm going to add it alternately with milk. And this will take 4 to 5 tablespoons of milk. So here's the first one. Here's one. It's going to make a very stiff dough. And because the dough is stiff, that's why I'm using the paddle attachment, because it can handle that. And you'll want to keep your speed very low so you don't tax your machine. So I added 2 now of the milk. So I'm going to add in some more of the spicy flour mixture here. Turn this back on. And again, pretty slow. So now I add the 3rd tablespoon of milk. And I'll add in the 4th. I'm going to add in my vanilla at this time, about a half teaspoon to a teaspoon of vanilla. And I can see the machine is working kind of hard. So I'm going to add in a 5th tablespoon of milk. You know, if it's a really dry day, you may need to add even a little extra. You just have to see how it is. Now add in the final bit of flour. Turn the machine up a little bit. I'm going to scrape it down then right before I finish. So I'll take all this off the paddle and just scrape the sides of the bowl. Then take the dough and wrap it in plastic wrap and chill it for about an hour. and then it'll be all ready to work with. So I'm just going to bring this together, and it's ready to wrap. Forming the speculaas, you can use molds like these, but the easiest thing over here on this side of the pond is to use a cookie press. And these are pretty easy to find in specialty stores. And I've had this one for years, and it has little hearts, which is very appropriate because we're eventually on our trip down the Rhine going to end up in Alsace. So I've chilled my dough, and I'm going to roll it in my hand like that, put a little bit of flour on my pastry cloth, and I'll just put a few of these here. I don't know if you've noticed, but my little speculaas molds, 2 of them are little tiny windmills, which is appropriate because we're making windmill cookies. And the other is a little lady in traditional dress. I just love when I travel and I can find things that are very regional. That's, to me, those are the best kind of little souvenirs to bring home, things that I can use in my kitchen. So if you don't have a press, then just use the bottom of a glass and just make plain cookies. The flavor's going to be the same. So I will take a little bit of flour from my board right here like this and dip this really well and flatten the cookie to about 1/4 inch. And then you can peel it right off of the cookie press and then dip it in flour every time. So I'll put that here. And these really do taste like the windmill cookies that you remember. When we lived in France, and we traveled quite a bit, but when we lived in France, I always bought windmill cookies. They're so fun, and the little ones really enjoyed them too. And I'm kind of a kid at heart, so that kind of cookie just really appeals to me. I love anything that has cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves and all. So I was very happy with those kinds of cookies. And boy, did they come out at the holiday time, during Christmas time. Oh my goodness, they were everywhere. All right, so, but let me show you how to use the speculaas molds. So I'll use a little windmill to start, and I'm going to make sure that I get lots of flour on every surface in here. I'm going to actually rub it in with my fingers and tap it out, and then take a small bit of cookie dough and press it in so that you fill in all the indentations. Then take a knife, I just use a table knife for this, and trim off just the edges that are overhanging, like that. And again, just make sure it's pressed into everything. Now the first one's always a little tricky. It may or may not come out. Here we go. Whoop. It may or may not come out. Yep, we'll do the second one. That's pretty typical because you really need that little bit of moisture in there from the cookie dough with the flour. So I'll dig that out, make sure everything is well floured again, and then we'll cross our fingers. You cross your fingers while I make the cookie, and hopefully it will come out this next time. Let's try again. You know, once you get going, these things go pretty quickly. Okay, press it in again. Okay. Aha! Life is good. And here you go. Darling little cookie that looks like a windmill. I'll put this on the cookie tray. So that's how you make the speculaas. You're going to bake these for 15 to 17 minutes at 325 degrees. They will get not hard, but they'll be firm remove them from the oven. I do suggest you use parchment paper for this. Let them cool for just about a minute and then remove them to a rack to cool all the way. And that is the Dutch speculaas. When we come back, we're headed down the Rhine River to Germany. So we're heading down the Rhine River on our river cruise, and we're now in Germany. And Germany is famous for Black Forest gingerbread. So let's make some because it's easy and it smells and tastes fabulous. So I have 3/4 of a cup of unsalted butter, and it's real soft. And to this, I'm going to add some brown sugar, about 1/4 cup, and some granulated sugar. And I'm going to mix all this together. You want to cream it so it's nice and light. And while that's starting to work, I'm going to work on the flour part. So I have 2 cups of flour. This is just all-purpose flour. I have a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Then I'm going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of ginger, ground ginger. If you like a little more gingery, add an extra 1/2 teaspoon. And I have 1.5 teaspoons of Saigon cinnamon. And I stir these together. I love all these spices. It smells so good. Okay, set this aside for a minute. Okay, so I have beaten my butter and sugars. I'm just going to scrape this down a little bit to make sure that everything is well mixed. Just going to turn on the machine for just a second, just to give a quick mix. Then I'm going to add in 2 eggs. I like to add them one at a time and beat between each one. And now I can add the other egg, and I'll scrape down the bowl. The butter loves to just go to the sides of the mixing bowl, so you need to get after it to make sure everything gets well blended. I'll turn the machine back on. I missed a spot. So again, just right in this one corner. Now I'm going to add in some molasses. This is a 1/2 cup of molasses. It's going to add sweetness and also more of that spicy flavor. This is the flavor that is so much associated with German baking, is molasses. And I'll turn this on and beat that slowly. And finally, I'm going to add some sour cream. I have a 1/2 cup of sour cream here, and I'm going to beat this in, but slowly. I don't want to completely break it down. So I'm just going to add it real slowly. Very slow beat. So now I'm going to clean up my board because I'm going to add the flour mixture in. So I'm going to grab a plate here. So I have a place to put my spatula, clean up my board so it's nice and neat for you. And here I have my flour mixture. So I'll begin to add this in gradually. And I have a cup of hot water. It's important to have the hot water because it's going to start to activate the baking soda and the molasses and all of those. When you get acids in here, in a cake mixture, they begin to react with the leavening agents. And in this case, the acid is the molasses. So I'll add a little bit of hot water and give it a chance to really mix before you add the next amount of water, the next amount of flour. Turn that up a little more. You always start it slowly, then you can add it up a little bit to get a little more air in there. So I'll add some more of the flour mixture. Now I'll add more of the hot water. Again, everything is very slow until it gets mixed. I can add just a tiny more. And when you bake a cake, you want to start with the flour mixture into your creamed and then your liquids on and off, and then finish with flour mixture as well. And that helps bind up all the fats. So I add a little more of the water here, very slowly, so it has a chance to incorporate. And the reason that I like to turn the mixture up on a higher speed after I get things starting to incorporate is because I am beating in air. And as I add air into the batter, then that's going to make a lighter cake when it bakes. And that way, when people slice into their cake and they have a bite and they go, oh my gosh, this is just so light and tender, that's why. So if you find that your cakes are kind of heavy, it may be that you need to add just a little more air in when you mix. And if you have a handheld mixer, you can still do the same thing. It doesn't have to be a stand mixer. Let's fire that up a little higher, add in the rest of my water, finish off with the flour mixture with all those beautiful spices. Now finish beating higher. And I have a 10-cup bundt pan. This one is pretty flute. And what I'm using to make sure that my cake comes out is a nonstick spray that has flour in it. And so take it to the sink and just give it a real good spray over the whole thing. And that will ensure that your cake actually drops out. I've preheated the oven to 325. This cake bakes at a little lower temperature than what you usually will bake a cake, and it will bake for about 40 minutes. So it's kind of a longer, slower baking. So I just pour this mixture in. Always run your spatula around the edge to make sure you have everything, and around the bottom to make sure everything's incorporated, and then begin to pour your batter in. So I rotate my pan as I go, trying not to get it all over the top. This really does smell divine, I gotta say. I made one of these recently, and every time a delivery driver came by, we gave him a slice. And by the end, it only took a couple days. The cake was gone, and everybody raved about it. This cake is typically served with chantilly cream, so heavy whipped cream, and I'm going to serve it today with a honey whipped cream. It's going to be really, really yummy. We'll use some of our Little Bear honey for that. All righty, so this is set, and I always just give it a little bang on the board to settle the batter in there so you don't have bubbles. It's ready for the oven. And next, we're traveling down the Rhine River some more. We're headed to France and the Alsace region. On our way down to Basel, Switzerland, we're making a stop in France and in the Alsace region. So I'm going to make a cinnamon Alsace braid for you today. So I have some milk. I'm going to pour this in, 2 tablespoons of water, and a 1/4 cup of butter. And I'm heating the milk until bubbles form around the edge. I don't want it super hot, but I do want the butter to melt and the milk to get just a tiny bit warm and scalded. So then while that goes, let's start on the bread dough. So I have about 2.5 to 3 cups of flour. I am going to only use part of this to get started. So I'm going to use about 1.25 to 1.5 cups of flour in here. And I'm going to add in 1 packet of dry yeast. If you have a large container of yeast, then that would be a scant tablespoon. I'm adding 1/4 cup of sugar. It's sticking a little bit, so we'll just get like there. About 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Then I just use a very slow speed. I am using a dough hook here, and you can do this by hand as well. So I'm watching the the milk, and I'm going to check and see the temperature. And I'm turning it off. The butter is not yet melted all the way, and that's perfectly fine. But I do want to make sure that the milk doesn't get too hot, because I'm going to add this in to here. And once I have the yeast in here, I don't want to kill the yeast by having the milk be too hot. Now I'll begin to add this lukewarm milk mixture to the bread flour. And I am using bread flour. You can use all-purpose, but bread flour is going to give you a much nicer texture to your dough. So I'll pour the rest of this in and mix this real well. You want this to all come together and start to develop the elasticity that comes from the action of the yeast and the gluten in the flour. Now I'm going to add in an egg. Turn my speed down a bit here. And about a half teaspoon of vanilla. Because this bread is going to be kind of sweet. So I want to have the vanilla in there to give that really lovely flavor, almost like a dessert bread flavor. And again, you just want to keep mixing to develop the gluten in the bread and get this yeast activated from the warm milk and the sugar. Now I'm going to add in more of the flour, just enough to make a soft dough. And day to day, it changes. It depends on how dry the day is. You may, if it's a really dry day, you may need less flour. If it's a day of high humidity, you may need a little more flour. I'm gonna turn this up just a little. We're again developing the gluten in the bread. I'm going to add just a little more flour to this. This is looking good. You see how the dough is really starting to stick with the dough hook, and that's good. That's showing me that this bread dough is really developing at this point. It's kind of fun to watch, it really is. Okay, and when it does this, you want to make sure you don't have the speed too high. So I'm going to turn this off, and now I can remove the bread dough and just pull all this off the hook. It's real sticky, so there you go. Oh yeah, I like this. This is good. So I'm going to put flour on my board like this. And I'll take all this out. And I'll knead the dough until it gets real smooth. See how stretchy it is? This is a good sign. This is going to be a great loaf of bread. Put a little flour on your hands, like that, and then knead the dough. And it should still feel moist. It shouldn't still feel real sticky, but it should feel moist. If it feels dry, you put too much flour in. And the way to rescue that is to dip your hands in water and work it back in. And it doesn't need a whole lot of flour, but if it starts to stick to your hands, just flour your hands rather than adding extra flour to the dough, because again, don't want that to get dried out. Now let's test to see if the gluten is developing well enough here. So you take your finger, you press in, and if it pops back, then it's good. It was a pretty slow pop back, so we're gonna knead just a couple more times. And you can knead gently. You don't have to really put your whole body into this. Be gentle with it. As I knead my dough, I'm gonna add in some raisins too. These are golden raisins. And it's very typical in the Alsace region of France to have golden raisins and things. They're sweet. They have that nice little chew to them. Let's check and see what the bread dough looks like. There it is. It is springing right back. Perfect. Okay, so I've sprayed a bowl with nonstick spray. And since I'm at high altitude, I also need to spray the top of my dough like that. And I've already sprayed a piece of plastic wrap because it's so dry up here. By the time the dough would rise, the whole top would be dried out. So you don't have to do this at low altitude, but up here in the mountains, absolutely. Then I cover it with a towel, put this in a warm place to rise. It'd probably take about 40 minutes. So the bread has now doubled in size. Isn't that pretty? And so I'm just going to take a little bit of flour from my bench here, and I punch this down and turn it out. Then I knead the dough just for a few minutes. And a couple of turns, it's ready. And then I like to make it into a log like this because I'm going to divide it in thirds. So I want to kind of eyeball what a third is. I just use a table knife for this. So I have about here and here, and I set two of them aside. Then I make 3 ropes, really long ropes. They're going to be about 22 inches long. And if the dough is not all together, just work it like that so that it's real workable for you in case it's got all kinds of little, see how it striates out like that? And then just use your hands and roll like this. If you have a lot of flour on your board, this is not very easy to do. So I keep it really, really light, the amount of flour. And just keep working it out like this. Here's another. Put this together, squeeze it together. There you go. Then just start rolling out. And the reason that I'm going to do this is because I'm going to braid the 3 pieces and form a heart. When one is in France, in the Alsace region, which is the eastern part of France, closest to Germany, everything is hearts. We went to the town of Strasbourg, which has a beautiful river right there, the Rhine, and all of the homes are the white painted stucco and the wonderful timbers that are woven into it. It's just spectacular. I'm going to go back to this one now that it's rested for a few minutes. But the entire town is full of hearts. Hearts bakeware, hearts hanging from shutters, hearts everywhere. That is where I got the pretty cloth that I have here, was in Kaisersberg. And finally we ended up, once we got to Switzerland, Randy and I took the train back into the Alsace region because we were going on a tour of the Alsace wine area, and we were in the little town of Colmar. And I thought I'd seen a lot of hearts before, but there are twice as many hearts in Colmar. So that's why when I was wanting to make a cinnamon bread for you today, I thought it would be so fun to make it in the shape of a heart. It's the kind of thing a kid would love to do, I think. All right, let's see if we can make this work. Now, I had boys, not girls. So braiding has never been my strong point. So those of you who have girls, you'll watch me and you'll say, I could have really done that easier. And yes, you could have. So I always come back and fix the end when I'm done. So I'm kind of stretching this as I go because I really do want it pretty thin. See, I'm just braiding this bread. It's gonna be so pretty. And you can make it into a long loaf, just a long braid, and that would be very pretty. But since we're in Alsace right now, I'm making it into a heart. So then turn under the edge a little bit and pinch. Turn the bread around. This is where I fix where I didn't start well. And I'm stretching as I go because I really do need to have this be pretty long so I can form the heart. Okay, then I'm going to pinch that together. And the top part here will be the part of the heart that dips in. So I'm going to stretch this and stretch this and bring these two together. and make sure you have them really well adhered together. Then bend this section in to make the heart. I'm going to transfer to this parchment and bring it back to the board. So right now it looks like a wreath. So this is where you need to just dip it in like that and shape your heart the way you want it. Then I'm going to cover it again with the plastic wrap that's sprayed and set it aside to rise one more time. So there you go. So after the braided heart had risen, I brushed it with an egg wash, sprinkled it with cinnamon sugar, and baked it at 350 degrees for about 18 to 20 minutes, and then let it cool. Thanks so much for joining me today on At Home with Christy Rost, where great food, beautiful wines, and hospitality are a tradition. I'd love to hear from you, so please connect with me on my Instagram and Facebook pages, and be sure to visit my website, ChristyRost.com. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Salt Seasons and Little Bear Honey, and our good friends at Analog Cookware, Melissa's Produce, and Microplane. See you next time.